I think we're ready to move to our next session. So if Caitlin can get me off the screen. So Alan and Christine will be our speakers.
Hi, Alan.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning from very wet Oxford. As Christine knows. Yeah, there's not many alternatives we would have had this morning anyway.
Alan, I'm coming to your discussion group or breakout session later on. Can you give me the link? Do I need a code for it?
No. Caitlin should have sent that to you. Otherwise, I can email it to you, Bill.
All right. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. And as I say, welcome from a very rainy Oxford, where Christine is in one side of the city and I'm at the other. Christine has kindly agreed to continue with what was going to be a speech last year to do it virtually this year. She's been in Oxford now for 10 years and has been the Director of Alumni Relations for Oxford University, along with lots of other roles. She comes from a background of doing similar work in the States with Harvard Business School, and before that at Harvard Art Museums. She has quite an active role within the Oxford community, because she also is part of the governorship of the Oxford Limited, which is the spin-off companies for Oxford University, which produces quite a good amount of their financial support, as well as being on the CERN Alumni Advisory Board, which is just around the corner from Oxford, and being a fellow at Jesus College and an associate at Somerville College as well. And she also does various other bits and pieces, including some work for the Reading for the Blind, and also is a governor, I believe, at Malvern School. So she does know the independent school sector as well. So Christine, without further ado, thank you very much for giving up your time. And as before, if you have any questions that arise, please put them in the chat and we'll deal with them at the end of the session. Christine, over to you.
Lovely, Alan. Thank you so much, and thank you all for sticking with me on this because it is a rainy day. Thank goodness it's not sunny and you're not drawn out into your gardens. I'm so delighted to be with you, and especially on such an auspicious occasion of your 50th anniversary. It really is. It's a remarkable time to take stock. It's a wonderful time to think about the future, but also to celebrate where you are at this particular stage. And happily, I do think alumni relations has quite a lot to do with that celebration, and I look forward to speaking with you more. I'm going to share my screen now as we do, and be sure that you can see all of that. Are you able to see that now? Yeah, great, lovely, wonderful. So when I first was invited to speak, you know, I wasn't quite sure what the approach should be really today, but I've gotten some wonderful guidance from Peter and Alan about this, and I had a couple of working titles to begin with. Really rather boring ones. There was Why Alumni Relations Matters, bringing the concept of friend raising into the 21st century, alumni engagement, a strategic partner. But I thought this notion of the white tablecloth was probably the place to start, because it really resonates about the changing perceptions of alumni relations today. And we really are moving from being sort of an effort where bottles of fizz are the main ingredient, to one where our work and the work of our institutions are indeed tied to the strategic aims of those institutions. And we're no longer sort of party planners. We really are, and I think we need and deserve to be considered strategic partners. So today, I'd like to talk about a couple of things. I'm going to start with a bit of background on me, just so that you understand what sort of motivated me to do the work I do. Some of it may resonate with you. A little bit about how did alumni relations get to where it is today, because it really is, at I think, a really important juncture, sort of an inflection point. Why I think institutions need to really reposition alumni relations in their own minds as a core function of their schools, of the school. It is no longer on the sidelines. I think it needs to be really highlighted and brought in as a core partner. I'm also going to talk a little bit about alignment, because I realize a number of you are representing societies that live outside of the institution, that are independently run. And I want to talk a little bit about why there is an important opportunity to align even more so with your institution, and what it does for the institution to do that, as well as how it could benefit your alumni. I want to remind us of what those successful building blocks are to ensure an impactful alumni engagement proposition. I want to talk a little bit about what this last year has meant to all of us, and remind us of actually some of the benefits that have come out of this. And then I want to leave some time for your questions or thoughts or even ideas. I'm probably not going to be speaking as long as Justin was. He was so articulate, and I have to say it was rather daunting. It is daunting to follow someone like that, who is so able and agile on his own to be able to express himself. And I remember Laurence Olivier saying that he always got terribly, terribly nervous and threw up before any performance. And that gave me courage, because frankly, I get very nervous as well. I really miss being together. I miss the physicality of addressing a group of people in a room where you can read body language and you can relate to each other's sort of shifting in the seats and humor and all of that. It's so hard to do this in a one-dimensional function, but we'll do what we do. So on with the show. So a little bit about me. So as you can tell, I was born in the US, although occasionally I'm accused of being a Canadian, which actually I love. It's been lovely to be considered Canadian over these past few years, because the state of the union is looking a little, or has been looking a little shaky. But I was born in the US on the East Coast, and I was very lucky to have parents who were wonderfully supportive of whatever I wanted to be in my life. I had a mother who was an extraordinarily outgoing person. She had all sorts of wonderful career paths that really served as a motivator for me. She was, for a period of time, even a spy for the CIA in the early 50s. And anyway, in her sort of formative years, she actually became a membership director and a development director at a maritime museum in Connecticut. And that was at a time when women really were not development directors. They really were not fundraisers. Really, it was the purview of men probably to be raising money, because it was men who had the money at the time. And so they would often, I think institutions found it very important to have men asking men for their contributions. But my mom was a real trailblazer, and she just went on to do remarkable work for this institution that she believed really, really strongly in, this maritime museum. So in the backdrop of my life, I had this mother who was working in this space. I went off to Concord Academy, an independent school in Massachusetts. And in fact, I was a legacy. My mom went there as well. And it was a boarding school. I was sort of, excited about being away from home, but I was really empowered by this school that actually changed my perception of who I was. And it really shaped, for me, the future, I would say. I remember clearly a teacher saying to me, Christine, I really want to help you explore your individuality. I want you to be the best person you can be in your own right. And that message stayed with me for such a long time. And when I think back in nostalgic terms to my experience at Concord Academy versus my experience at my university, Connecticut College, I really feel Concord shaped the person I am. I think Connecticut College helped my intellect, certainly, and it was an important formative educational experience, but Concord really shaped the person I was going to be. So as you think about your alumni and you think about the experience that they had at your schools, because it's such an important pivotal time in their lives as the youth of as they explore their sort of personas and their gifts, think about sort of tapping into that, because it's an important thing. When I was at boarding school, I was very involved. I became a dorm president, and I was a tour guide for prospective parents coming to the school. And I met with prospective parents to encourage them to think about Concord as a place that they might want to send their children. I had the privilege, in fact, of taking around Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward on a tour of the school, which honestly, I was probably 15, 16 years old at the time, and Butch Cassidy had just come out. And I remember being absolutely, I mean, just completely gobsmacked by this opportunity. And you can't tell this, but I'm tall. I'm 5'10" tall. And when Mr. Newman and Ms. Woodward came into the admissions office, and I stood up from the chair I was sitting in, I realized I was wearing a pair of brown clogs, which were very popular at the time, which made me pretty much 6 feet tall. And Paul Newman was not even, he was like 5'6" or 7 or 8 maybe. So suddenly I was having to sort of dip down to shake the hand of Paul Newman, which was really sort of a calculated costume error on my part. Anyway, but I was very involved with Concord when I was there as a student. And so as I left, I had really strong feelings of loyalty and involvement, and wanted to support the school, and felt grateful for having had also a full scholarship for the entire 3 years I was there. So that was, again, that notion of gratitude sort of played into things, as well as my sense of obligation to the school for helping me be who I was. I went on to study Asian Studies at Connecticut College, which was amazing and wonderful and a brilliant experience for me. I did a junior year abroad at the University of Durham over here, which was fabulous. I cannot admit to the fact that I worked terribly hard, because I think I was so just enamored of being here in England and just the whole collegiate experience at Durham. But it also, it was yet another touch point for me with an institution that changed me, that gave me an opportunity and made me more aware of institutional alignment and affiliation. After I graduated from Connecticut College, I wanted to be a curator at a museum. So I'd studied Asian Studies, and my idea was to go to work and have some experience, but then basically go back, get a PhD in Chinese art and work in a museum. So my first job out of college was at the Harvard Art Museums. I got a job, but it was as a secretary in the conservation department, and this was a secretary who could not type at all. So I didn't last terribly long in that role, but then I moved very quickly. Within a year, I moved to the Friends office, which is exactly what we do, which is build relationships with people. And I was responsible in a 3-person office, tiny little office. We were responsible for keeping the membership body alive and making sure that we were drawing in new members. We had a sort of a higher level development function as well, with some high level donors and donor groups. We did exhibition openings, we did special education programs, concerts. It was the all singing, all dancing, front-facing piece of the university's art museums. And I loved that. It was fantastic. I was representing an institution that I believed so strongly in, that I was really aligned with, and I was representing it to people who cared about that institution and cared about what it represented. So art lovers, and the students of Harvard who were studying art history at the time. Interestingly, after 10 years, and this may be no surprise to anybody, I had nowhere to go, because my boss was quite happy in her role, and I would have had to knock her off or something. So I had to find a new job. I had to take on find a new opportunity. And the Harvard Business School had a job open as a reunion coordinator for them. And this is me on the right as a bright, shiny-faced reunion coordinator at Harvard Business School. And I really felt I was moving to the dark side. I mean, the business school, I'd been representing art, and I cared about art, and I wanted to be a curator in my youth. But suddenly I was in the business school, in the height of a really interesting period of time, sort of for the world in terms of business, changing the model of business in terms of business as a change agent for good. But it was an extraordinary experience. And I was there over a period of time where I could move up the ladder, got to the point where I was director of alumni relations at the business school, and then became executive director of the external relations office for the business school, which included development, alumni relations, communications, and all of the back office operation. It was about an 80-person shop. And it was a really daunting effort because throughout my career, I'd been working in the alumni relations side of things, which was the relationship building, but I'd never had the responsibility of really managing a big fundraising operation. We were in the middle of a capital campaign. We were finishing it up. And that was pretty daunting as well. And it was the first ever, but we closed it out and exceeded our goals, which was remarkable. Fundraising at Harvard is a completely different world. It is an extraordinary place to be. The resources are very deep, and the experience you get is with the most extraordinary people to back you up in terms of resources and leadership, but also the individuals you're working with are just remarkable. So it was a heady space, an extraordinary time to be there. There came a time in 2010 when a new dean joined the business school, and he had a very different idea about how he wanted to run things, and he wanted to bring in his own team. So it was interesting. I found myself leaving the business school and trying to think about what was next. And I could never have predicted I would be an alumni relations director or external relations person, but it was where I felt absolutely comfortable, and I knew I wanted to do more of it. So I started to sort of scout around and look and see where the opportunities were. I wasn't really thinking about moving abroad. But as I was getting ready for a 2-week holiday in London, I'd rented an Airbnb. I got an email from a friend with a job description from a headhunter for this very job that I'm in. And this friend said, Christine, this just has your name all over it. This is something you really cannot not apply for. And so I thought, well, why not? This is a moment. I was 50 something, 54 something. And I thought, this is a great new chapter. And I didn't have, I didn't have a family. I wasn't married. I didn't have children. My mother had died. I didn't have sort of a reason to stay in the States. So off I came. And the job has been a remarkable one. Throughout, I've remained a serial volunteer. I've continued to support Concord Academy and Connecticut College and Durham in every way I can as a front-facing volunteer, but also financially. I really feel it is a calling for me, and not simply a job. And I think one thing that was really interesting when I was looking at getting to know Justin a little bit before this conference, I looked him up on LinkedIn, and he had posted a wonderful quote from somebody called Erica Williams Simon, who's an American journalist. And she says, don't ever attach yourself to a person, a place, a company, an organization, or a project. Attach yourself to a mission, a calling, a purpose only. That's how you keep your power and your peace. And I think that really defines what we do in alumni relations. It really is a mission. It's a mission to connect people to an institution, to represent their interests to the institution, and ideally represent the institution back out to the alumni that it holds dear. So I think it's really important to be thinking about the work that we do that way. So a little bit, how did we get here? Where did alumni relations sort of come from? Well, in the early years, alumni relations consisted simply of bringing a cohort of people together around food and drink and sort of pressing that nostalgia button. It was all about sort of remembering the halcyon years and then sending them on their way. And in between alumni reunions, there would be an alumni magazine that would feature maybe some class news or some school reports. But overall, the emphasis really was on nostalgia. And certainly the concept of giving, of alumni giving, whilst it was very embedded in the US, it's a fairly new concept here in the UK. And interestingly, culturally for me, moving here has been an eye-opener, realizing in the US how easy it was somewhat to raise money, to talk about the needs of the institution and to make that compelling argument to people about why they should give. And actually making an ask, actually saying to someone, I think you have the potential to have an impact here, and I'd love to see you do so. And we are really keen to talk to you about a gift, possibly in the range of £5,000 or, name that amount. it's often difficult here to talk about money. And interestingly, it's an uncomfortable subject for many. And I think that's something we here in the UK have to understand and embrace that uncomfortableness, but also be thinking creatively about how to adapt and how to create a message or a cue for people that is culturally appropriate. In the US, I think we are all almost born with a microchip embedded in our necks that say, you know, be supportive of your university. So much of it is sort of around maybe sporting events. You know, you look at things like homecoming efforts at American universities. It's all very rah and supportive. But I think we are taught early on that our institutions need us. And indeed, our institutions expect us to give back. And I'm not sure that we are as articulate about that here in the UK. For instance, I don't do very much, and I'm working to do more of this. I don't do very much with the current students that are at Oxford right now to explain what they're going to be joining when they graduate. There's not much enculturation, there's not much expectation about what the alumni community might do for them or what they might do as part of that community. And I think there's an opportunity to be a bit more articulate about that, an opportunity to really highlight the benefits of this community that they will be a member of, but also somewhat introduce the idea of the obligation part of it, and whether it's to give back as financially or whether to give back as a mentor or as a hirer of the graduating students. There are numerous ways I think we can be a bit more articulate about this. In the States, even parents who are paying, as we heard earlier, eye-wateringly high tuition fees for their children to attend, even they are asked to contribute. There is a culture of that involvement of parents over and above what they are already giving. And it's something to think about within here in the UK, if there's an opportunity to engage parents and maybe not suggesting you go from 0 to 60 in 60 seconds and suddenly create, you know, a parents campaign, but really begin the process of introducing it and thinking about how it can be part of the institution going forward. In the US, the idea of fundraising amongst younger alumni, in fact, graduating students give class gifts. They get together before they even leave the school to give a class gift in the honor of their graduation. So that idea of starting that process of asking for contributions and involvement early on is a possibility. It's possible, but maybe the concentration needs to be more on participation, on the number of students who've even given £5, something on that level is worth thinking about. One of the things I think that's happened in the UK, and I heard this when I first moved here, was universities almost leading with an ask of their alumni before they built up any relationship with them. And that clearly is not an appropriate approach. Alumni relations needs to precede anything. An alumni relationship needs to precede any kind of contribution. And it really needs to be done in a thoughtful way. And this is where I think alumni relations has moved out of this party planning sphere and into more of a core function. I've also seen, and interestingly, amongst professional organizations, they are all realizing the importance of creating alumni organizations. So look at McKinsey, look at Anderson Consulting, look at some of the big law firms, and they're all creating alumni associations to keep their former staff close so that they see them as opportunities in the future for either new clients or new relationships. So I think this idea of building community is one that has legs, significant legs, beyond simply the school or the educational format. But I'm happy to say that now I think our alumni engagement efforts are much more imaginative. And I can tell you, our reunions at Oxford, our big university reunions, have got so many elements to them that are engaging and go beyond this notion of nostalgia. We've now created this program where we actually take our alumni reunions on the road, and we go to really remarkable cities in Europe or in Asia, and we'll create an event around that city that is engaging and informative and content led. When we do our events in Oxford, we're doing these events for the family. We're involving young people as well. These two adorable children had a whole program designed for them as well, because frankly, we'd love to introduce the university to young people before they've even, before they've made up their minds about where they may be going. We'd love to consider the university as a potential place. And I think it's true for schools as well. The idea that you think about bringing whole families back for these experiences that reintroduce them to the power of the institution, and as well as their memories. It's also what the institution is up to now. So thinking about integrating the opportunity to sit in on classes, for instance, to tours of campus conducted by students, what the admissions team is looking for today, all of those things where the reunion becomes a full experience that is really dynamic and gives people an opportunity to learn something new. One of the things that universities really rely on, I think, is their research, their academics to lead the way in engagement. It's one of the things that we do at Oxford. We don't do purely social events anymore. Everything is pretty much content driven. On a school level, I think thinking amongst yourselves about what is it that you could provide? Are there opportunities where your teachers could indeed almost lead a class for your alumni that would introduce them to something new or reignite their interest in a particular topic? I think it's a really interesting question, how schools engage with alumni beyond simply that idea of reminding them of those lovely years, but whether there's a sort of an intellectual side of the engagement quotient. So one of the euphemisms that I often hear about people using when it comes to alumni engagement is this idea of friend raising, and I'm not really a fan of that, because frankly, to me, alumni are not your friends. I mean, they should already be your friends, frankly. And I think friend raising almost sounds as if it's trivializing what we do as an industry, if you will, or what we do as volunteers. I think it's really a notion that alumni are key partners, are advocates, are indeed our ambassadors. And the work that we do in engaging them is powerful and impactful and has an outcome, has a measurable outcome. So I really would love us to sort of be thinking about ourselves in a bit more of a professional way that sort of takes us out of this idea of the sort of the soft emotional engagement, but more into the sort of the strategic. So this is a term that I know sort of strikes one as a business school term, the value proposition. But I think this is one of the most important things to think about. Alumni, as our key partners, need to understand to some extent what they bring to the table, and also what we can provide them. Our alumni need to trust us. They need to trust that the institution is being managed prudently. They need to know that their resources that they give to us are being carefully stewarded. The institution itself needs to prove that it's worthy of alumni investment. And in some cases, it really is about giving back. It's really about the institution continuing to prove itself to its alumni by giving them something, giving them a sense of meaning and purpose and involvement. So I'd love to know, and this is something maybe we can talk about in the chat, if you have a sense of where your alumni sit in relation to your school's strategy. I think we often take our alumni as sort of a given, and we don't have a really clear sense of how they fit into the institution's goals. So Oxford University, back in 2018, developed a strategic plan. It's a very, in classic Oxford fashion, it's an extremely wordy document. And it has something like 25 different priorities. And these priorities are all about, you know, identifying opportunities for students as interns, or it might be creating more fundraising opportunities to support capital plans. Anyway, 25 different priorities. And when this was introduced, I felt it was really important to remind the university and remind my staff as well, where we fit in that strategic plan. What's the role that alumni can play in delivering on that strategic plan? Because it can't all come down to the staff and the academics. There has to be a role that the alumni population can play in support of that. So forensically, I went through each of these priorities and looked at, was there something that alumni could do to help support that priority? And it really helped us. It helped us as an office tell our story. It helped us direct our activities so that we knew what we were doing was important to the school, to the university. And it also gave us something to talk about with our alumni. So one of the things I'd really like you to think about is, first of all, does your school have a strategic plan? And if so, where is it that your alumni can add that value to that plan? It helps you, I think, elevate yourself a bit more as that strategic partner. One of the things that also was a really sort of an eye-opener for me was indeed coming into the UK, where just the nomenclature was different. So in many cases, you don't necessarily call your alumni, you call them your old members. And I found that really sort of obviously lovely and charming and wonderfully sort of, I don't know, it felt very clubby. But then I also tried to put myself into the shoes of, let's say, a 21-year-old graduating from Oxford, who was going to become an old member. And how does that feel? How does that feel to somebody who's young and graduating and joining a community? So another thing I'd love you to think about is how is it that you speak to your alumni? How do you think about them as participants and those young people in particular? What is the voice you use with them, and what are the triggers that you use to engage them and keep them involved? And I loved that idea that Justin had about having this sort of satellite or sort of another sort of an effort of a governing body that might be focused more on a younger and more a more agile or more representative sort of group of people. Because to me, I think it's going to be hard for all of us. It is always hard for all of us as our young people graduate from our schools and our universities, for them to see themselves in the institution if what they're seeing is a fairly sort of mature and fairly maybe unreceptive to them group of people or association. So thinking about how is it that we can create something for our younger people that is reacting and responsive to what they're looking for. Alignment within our institutions is really important. And this was another thing I found interesting, was the number of alumni associations that lived outside of the institution. And many of you represent those societies. And I think it's remarkable the work you do, because my goodness me, you are volunteers, and what a huge job it is to be running societies independently. But I would really love to see more alignment and love to see more of a real sort of associative relationship with the schools. So I, as you heard, or maybe, yes, I think Alan mentioned this. So I sit on the council of Malvern College. I also am a trustee with the Malvernian Society, which indeed does live outside of the college. And it's made up of remarkable volunteers who do incredible amounts of work. But I really feel as if there's an opportunity for the Malvernian Society, and also for others too, to be more aligned and to be indeed more driven by the strategic priorities of the school. So the Oxford University Society, before I got here, lived outside of the university. It was run also by volunteers, and it was a remarkable organization that over the years built up a really significant war chest of money. They had regular events that they ran. They were very local, that said, they were fairly local, but there were organizations that were based out in the major cities, mostly in the UK, and they began to spring up around the world. But it was an independent association. And probably, I don't know, 10, 15 years before I got there, the university, I think, realized the power and the importance of bringing that association into the university to be able to align it with its development goals, as well as its admissions goals, its outreach goals. So over a course of time, it did that. It brought the association in. And I think for the volunteers that were running it, at first the notion of that that centralization was really quite scary and demotivating, because it was a sense of loss of power. But over time, when this university was able to describe the benefits of that integration and the professionalization of it, there seemed to be more and more appreciation for it. And happily for me, when the association came in under the umbrella of the university, it brought an endowment of £1 million, a significant endowment that actually the payout of which now funds my department, not exclusively, but it provides significant funding, which has allowed me to do things that I would not normally be able to do. But there are also a number of other benefits that I think are really important. So the idea that we are actually sort of systems-led today is an important one. So one of the things that we know drives a lot of our work is data. If we don't have good data for our alumni, we can't engage with them. And one of the things that a central approach to data does for us is it allows for the collection and sharing of that data and the assurance that it's accurate and that the systems support it. So I feel that there's such an importance in ensuring that databases are kept accurate and are shared, and that the left hand simply knows what the right is doing. The core functions of alumni engagement, by living outside of the institution, means that it's probably a little bit less sort of synchronized with what the head and the leadership of the institution is looking to accomplish, only because there's not that integration. So I feel as if there's an opportunity for collaboration and more sharing of resources that serve the wider good. So if you think about admissions, for instance, here at the university, we're very reliant on our alumni going into the inner city schools, for instance, in the areas of the UK where we really need to make the case for coming to or considering Oxford. We also find our alumni can be incredibly useful when it comes to the marketing department in terms of serving as role models that they can market, but also helping to tell the story and explain the value of the university. Obviously, an alignment with the career service is so important because our alumni can help to mentor our students, but also hire them. So I really feel that there's an opportunity to really leverage the work that we do by doing so together and ensuring that we are aligned and synchronicitous in our work. One of the things that we've been spending some time in our office thinking about is what indeed constitutes an alumni journey. What is it that you can expect an alum to experience within the university or within the school over a lifetime. And by looking at that journey, that alumni journey, so what somebody experiences at the recent graduate level is going to be very different than what they experience 25 years later, what their expectations are of the institution, but also potentially how the institution can use them. And one of the things that I think can be really powerful to do is to sort of sit down amongst yourselves and almost map out that journey and to understand what the alumni are thinking, how they're behaving, how our systems, but also our offerings can mirror what they need at that particular time in their lives. I don't think we've done that enough in the past. I think we've sort of taken it for granted. And I think there's a huge opportunity to come together with colleagues to have that discussion. And it can be a very engaging one for alumni to participate in as well, because they are often the living, breathing examples of that. But it will be also so important for us as alumni relations people to reflect this experience of our alumni in the work that we do, and to do it in a really smart and informed way. So one of the things I just want to remind us of is what is it that drives an alumni engagement program? What is it that ensures that we can be successful? So I've talked a bit about the data and the fact that systems need to drive what we do. They need to be robust and aligned so that we are actually making decisions based on that data. And I say that in that if you've got an alumni population that is located primarily in the UK and primarily local to where you are, where your school is, that's going to tell you that you just need to do a lot more sort of on a local level. But there's a huge value if your alumni, or if the diaspora is significant, and if you're finding that there are huge concentrations of young alumni, let's say, who might be in Asia, there needs to be a very different approach to that engagement level, that engagement effort based on that data. We do an awful lot of analysis of our data, and that means looking at the demographics, but also looking at the behavior of our alumni. Who comes to the events that we do and who doesn't come? And potentially, why don't they come? Why is it that they're not drawn in by the work that we do or the offerings that we make? Understanding why they do participate is as important as understanding why they don't. And also understanding where you can tweak things to sort of increase that participation is so important. I think a clearly articulated message of what you want your alumni to do is so important. We don't often say this out loud, what you want someone to do. I want you to be a mentor, or I want you to be, an advocate for the school or an ambassador for the school. We're often fairly passive and we assume our messages are understood. And I don't think we can afford to be so passive and so oblique. And I think it's so important that our leaders, our heads of our schools, as well as our teachers, as well as our parents, as well as our alumni, understand what the strategy is for the school and understand where the school wants to go so that they can mirror that. Our alumni communities can be our beacons. They can be our spokespeople. They can carry the water for us and be our advocates if they have the right information. I believe pretty strongly that events are not a means, are indeed a means to an end, not an end in and of itself. We do an awful lot of events at Malvern, and we really pride ourselves at the volume of events that we host. But what I'm really interested in knowing is, by coming to that event, what did it achieve? What is it that we wanted those alumni to do or to know or to take away with them after that event? Now, if we're simply reminding them of how special it was to be at that school, or we're simply giving them an opportunity to see their old classmates, that's lovely. But there should be, I think, the opportunity for even more elaboration of a real sort of key outcome of that event. At Oxford, we're starting to no longer simply measure the bums and seats at our events, but we're embedding in our events calls to action, where we can say, did you know there's an opportunity to volunteer as a career mentor? Did you know there's an opportunity to join a local group? Did you know that there's an opportunity to offer an internship to a student? Really thinking creatively about informing alumni so that they walk away even more sort of empowered. I talked a bit about that alumni journey and tracking where people are in that journey. And again, it's just staying really alive to your alumni, understanding where they are at a particular stage in life, and indeed, how is it that they want to be involved. Communications, I think, are so important. And this is hard for smaller organizations who don't have, the benefit of a large communication staff. But I think communications should be targeted. And that means messaging is going to be different to a 22-year-old or a 25-year-old. The language you use is going to be different than the language you're going to use to an old member who graduated 35 years ago or 40 years ago. And really thinking about that a little bit. And it can't be sort of all singing, all dancing. We have in our mind, wouldn't it be a lovely thing to be a bit more sort of proactive in saying, gosh, Fred Smith, you attended this event last Thursday on geophysics. Here's an article on geophysics that's just come out from the geophysics department. It would be lovely to have systems that supported that and to be able to communicate to people based on their interests. We're not that sophisticated yet, but that could be somewhere where we get to, where we start collecting what people are interested in and using that data or information to be able to give them what they want. Many of you amongst us today are volunteers. And again, I just salute you. I think you are absolutely the sort of the gold dust for our institutions. We could not do what we do without you. But we have to constantly be refreshing ourselves as volunteers. We have to constantly be finding, sort of almost building succession planning somewhat. We have to be finding the new volunteers. We have to be identifying where they are best suited. We have to train them. We've got to really bring them into a place where they can be successful. We need to motivate them and we need to thank them. And we don't do that often enough, I don't think. And I think it's just so important to be thinking about how it is that we elevate volunteerism and give people that that sense of gratitude for the work that they do. Finally, and this is so important, I think our leaders, our school heads and our academics, our teachers, our administrators, they all need to buy into the importance of alumni engagement. They all need to be understanding and really embracing the importance of alumni in the success of the institution. And that's just, that buy-in and that support means that we need to educate them about that. Now, many heads are really good at this, and I can tell you the new head at Malvern, he's not new anymore really, is fantastic at that. But I think it needs constant sort of reassurance and constant communication to be sure that the people leading the alumni associations, many of you volunteers again, or the alumni staff need to stay close to the leadership so that it's you are all representing what the leadership needs to accomplish. So we've had a pretty nasty year and a half, haven't we? And many of you may have even had to stop what you do, may have had to put a lot of your engagement on hold. I know many development offices did because they felt that it was not appropriate to be fundraising during this pandemic. Interestingly, Oxford has had one of its most successful years this year, but part of that is certainly because of the research that they've done around COVID. But I think this has been such an important time to keep relationships alive, and yes, even to cultivate new ones. And frankly, this whole digital experience, as we've said all along, whilst it's not ideal for us, and we've really missed that notion of being together, for me, I'll tell you, the world has come together. I've never engaged with more alumni than I have this year. I think our alumni engagement has gone up something like 700% in the last year, just by being able to provide digital experiences for people. We are much more forgiving of digital, the notion that, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? That's sort of normal for us now. But we're also getting better at it. We're getting more adept at it. So I think it's really important to be thinking about harnessing this digital experience as we go forward. This is going to have a lasting effect on our institutions and a lasting effect on the current students who've been living through the pandemic and perhaps a remote learning experience. Many of those students will graduate with a very different feeling about the school. And it may be because they will feel that they were unsupported. It may be because they will feel, that sort of residual anxiety of learning remotely and feeling out of touch, feeling that they didn't have the socializing that they had or were expecting to have. This could lead to sort of a bit of a scarring of our recent graduates. And I think we're going to need to think hard about what that means and think hard about responding to that. So imagine back in the 1970s, I think it was, here at Oxford, 5 of our colleges went co-ed. They went from male colleges to co-ed colleges. The experience of those women during those first few years was horrific. They really felt completely marginalized and unwelcome. And that left a very, very bitter taste in their mouths. And there was a lot that those colleges had to do to re-embrace those people and bring them back into the fold. So I think there's an opportunity to respond to this situation once you understand what the residual effect has been. There may be the opposite effect, which is we survived. We are the children of COVID, and we've come out the other side, and we are better together. So it'll just be something I think to be thinking about. For many of you and for many of the teams, the official teams that are alumni relations embedded in the schools, many of your staff may be wanting to work remotely. So I think that's going to be something you're going to need to think about: is what does an office look like when we get back onto the horse again? What does the new normal mean? I'm going to be really interested to see what travel looks like. We have alumni in 180 different countries, and we're used to getting on planes and going to visit them. And I'm not sure that that's going to be the case any longer. But I think it's going to be different, but maybe better, So I want to leave you with a lovely description, because I think it's actually sort of reminiscent of what we're all facing. So this is a school's mission. We develop maybe it's one of yours. We develop outstanding young people with the skills, resilience, and initiative to flourish in a rapidly changing global marketplace. Pupils are independent, take calculated risks, and adopt the ethos of service to others that underpins the school. They approach the world with confidence. Well, I think we're going to have to adapt our alumni programs to stay paced with change. Our schools know they have to do that for their pupils. Well, we're going to have to do that for our alumni. Our old norms for engagement will need some updating. Our alumni will be looking to have an impact. So what can our alumni do to have an impact, whether it's in the world or whether it's within our schools? They're looking to put their fingerprints on things. What experience or activity or call to action can you provide alumni that is indeed meaningful? And how can your school help alumni to realize their goals along with the goals of the school? I think it's really time to transition alumni relations away from being all about white tablecloths and more about strategic partnerships. So thank you very much. Very happy to answer some questions, whether they be specific or whether they be more sort of psychological, about where alumni fit in the institution. But yes, thank you all very much. I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Christine. Christine, I'm going to put a couple of questions together here. The first ones are about the balance between friend raising and fundraising, and there's quite a few people are concerned. They do feel that you need to make sure that the events are friendly rather than just, or here's an opportunity to invite me to ask me for money, as it were. How would you respond to that? I know you've answered a little bit of that.
Yeah, so I could not agree more. So I'm very lucky at Oxford in that my office, the Alumni Relations Office, is separate from fundraising. I'm separate from the development office. I'm not tied into it at all. So everything I do is about engagement. Everything I do has to do with strengthening the community, making sure that people feel engaged, involved, inspired, and find an opportunity to get more engaged or more involved if they want to. So for me, all of our events have to start with knowing the audience and creating something that is going to bring them in. Fundraising, in fact, is never part of my sort of my expectation for my event. I never follow up after an event with a fundraising ask, because that's not my role. Now, what I do is embed in my events maybe a fundraising priority. So for instance, if one of our priorities is to raise money for climate change, to focus on the research for climate change, I'll do an event around climate change so that the alumni can understand what the university is up to when it comes to that. But it's very oblique. It's not offensive, nor is it explicit at all. So I very much believe that our role is to ensure the community is strong and engaged and involved, and only then can a fundraising operation or ask take place.
Okay, the next one is from development teams that are quite small. So you've worked in a 3-man office a while ago. One in particular has been furloughed and is now coming back and having to play catch up, they feel, on what's happening. What suggestions do you have about the best way to prioritize at the moment?
Gosh, that's a great question. And I think it's a question we're all facing. So I know some of the colleges here at Oxford have had to furlough their development staff or alumni relations teams or both. And I think the best thing to do when you first come back on is almost take the perspective of stewardship first. In other words, coming back into the team, getting back up to speed with either your donors, current donors, to sort of reintroduce yourself somewhat, but also to just understand what they've been doing. You know, one of the things I found so interesting, one of the colleges here, when we first went into lockdown, the director of alumni relations for that college made it her business to call all of her older alumni above a certain age, just to say, how are you? Are you all right? How are you doing? It was really an opportunity to check in and to find out what they were feeling, how things were going for them. So a very light touch and a very sort of a stewardship approach. I think another thing to do is to obviously get back into the experience of understanding what the funding needs are indeed for the school. In other words, reminding, because they may have changed. You know, the reality is the schools that I'm aware of, you know, have had some serious financial challenges over this pandemic. So it may mean that there's been a shift in the emphasis of what the funding priorities are all about. So I think it really is all about getting back into a habit of being in touch with your alumni, being in touch with what they've been going through, and reintroducing and reinforming yourself as to what the needs are of the school.
This is a question from a parent of Oxford students at the moment, actually, but follows on from what I think a lot of schools are doing. They're trying to create good citizens for the future. And as such, that's part of the alumni role, is that we're trying to keep that going. How are you sort of approaching that within the university, of making your students going out into the world good citizens and role models, and to do the things that we think are socially best?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's so important right now. This generation, these are activists. these are young people who are, you know, they're looking at Greta Thunberg and they're getting out and they're you know, waving placards and they are getting involved with homeless shelters or delivering food to food banks. So I think we are very much need to be responsive to that trigger in those young people. And so in some cases, we are identifying ways in which our local alumni groups might give back to their local communities. So we've got a young group called Oxford 10, and this is based in London, but it's turning into more of an international group. And it's an alumni association for people who have graduated within the last 10 years. And it's really looking at ways in which it can serve as an advocacy group, getting people, it's not only sort of holding events that might be, you know, drinks parties in London, that sort of, you know, sort of socializing, but really sort of social activist roles that might contribute to the well-being of their communities. And I think this is going to be the way forward for most of our alumni groups, that they will, many of them will exist for obvious reasons as kind of a networking, a local networking function, but that they will also be looking for practical ways of giving back. One of the things that Harvard did a while ago, and I thought this was very powerful, they did a survey of their alumni to understand how many of them sat on boards, on social sort of community boards or school boards or nonprofit boards. How much time did they give back as volunteers and as contributors to the betterment of society? And the contributions that they got back from the survey were remarkable and told a really powerful story about Harvard's alumni as being contributors to the greater good, as opposed to being seen as these kind of, you know, cowboys and cowgirls that were all about sort of, you know, making a lot of money and giving money back to Harvard, an already rich institution. It was demystifying some of that and explaining the ways alumni contribute outside of that. And I think that's something we're all going to be keen to do. So we're putting together sort of a list of alumni, for instance, that we can put up as examples and role models of people who've taken non-traditional careers, who aren't doing the sort of things that would be typical or expected of an Oxford alum today, but are making huge inroads.
There's another question here, which, yeah, I suppose it is a question. Does not the art of hosting a dinner party foster goodwill? Can we expand that? How important are the events that you set up very good to attend? Now, if it's not a organized event, you're going to lose people, aren't you?
Oh Lord, yes. So yeah, so it is really, and you know, the other thing there, Alan, is that we are competing. Our events, your events, all of our events are competing against so much today. And we have to figure out ways to be really, you know, sort of unusual or fizzy or well organized. We have to build reputations for ourselves of excellence, don't we? And that means that we've got to find interesting and different hooks. But that said, we all stumble. There are times, I've got great examples of things that went completely pear-shaped that my heart sinks every time I think about them. It's bound to happen. But I think really thinking about what your core capabilities are. What is it that really does sort of make you unique as a school, as a community of alumni? And what is it that maybe your alumni bring to the table specifically? So where is it that you can tap into the alumni themselves to be participants and sort of headliners in those groups? But I get it is very hard these days to compete against so many remarkable other things that are going on. You know, one of the things that I think is really important is sort of experimentation. I've started to participate in a series called 5 by 15, which is run out of London somewhere, about by a woman who puts together 5 people who each talk for 15 minutes. It's a really lovely format. It's sort of the TED Talk format. And it's frankly so interesting because, first of all, Zoom fatigue is out there, people. Absolutely. I mean, I cannot tell you, by the end of the day, I am so cross-eyed with looking at a screen. But if I have something that is fizzy and different, where I'm literally engaging in some way with somebody on the screen that is shorter and more punchy, I love that. I think it's actually a really interesting idea. So thinking about another thing too, are real sort of experiential activities. So with our alumni weekend recently, we did something where we did an origami session. Literally bring a piece of paper and we will show you how to fold it, not into an airplane, but into a tulip or a, you know, something, a skyscraper. And it was one of the most fun things that we've ever done. So thinking about transitioning away from those typical sort of staring into a screen events, but something that is actually got some kind of an experiential factor can be fun.
We're slightly over, but I'd like to finish with one last question. When I took over as Director of Alumni Relations, my first thing was to start a young Owain Fleet Society for the people that were going to Oxford University, to try and keep them within our bounds and away from your clutches, as it were. And should we, as schools and universities, have different approaches to what we're doing?
So first of all, Alan, I think we need to acknowledge the fact that as individuals, we have many chambers in our hearts. And that means that I'm going to care deeply about Concord Academy. I'm going to care deeply about Connecticut College. I'm going to care deeply about Durham. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not one or the other. And each of those relationships are different. And we shouldn't be worried about that. We shouldn't be worried about losing people. You know, at the University of Oxford, we have 39 different colleges. And when I first arrived, got the message from the colleges, you know, don't think about touching my alumni. There are alumni, not yours. The reality is Oxford alumni have many experiences and many affiliations. And our alumni are telling me over and over again, Christine, don't assume anything. And they're telling their colleges that too. Don't assume that I only care about you, Maudlin, because frankly, I love being a member of this wider 350,000 person association. And I get access to many more people and many more sort of thought leaders. So don't assume that it has to be one or the other, but clarify the role that you want to play in my life. Tell me what you want me to do for you. And if I can, I'll do it.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Christine. And thank you. Over time, you said you wouldn't have enough time.
I never thought I would be able to talk this long. Sorry.
No. Absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much for that. I've got a whole page of notes here. And as soon as we're allowed, I owe you a very large drink and we can discuss this a little bit more.
Well,
so thank you very much for your time.
If anybody has any questions ever, please give me a ring or an email, please. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Bye. Great. Very good.
We're gonna move to breakout sessions at 12. So we've got a short break, 10 minutes. So you'll need to find the login for the breakout session that you have registered for, which might take you a few minutes, and we'll reassemble back on this Zoom login at 12:30. So I hope that works. It's all very new, but fingers crossed everybody can get to the right session.
It's actually a different link for the Q&A one at 12:30. But it's in the email that everyone got, so it'll be okay.
So you need to log into the Q&A login. I should have checked with you first. Sorry, Katya. I'll make sure I do that as well. Okay. So I'll see you all shortly. Thank you.